You'll get it. Okay, we're in chapter number 17. 2 Samuel, chapter number 17. Yes, ma'am. 2 Samuel 17. This is lesson 9 of Old Testament survey. And Lord willing, and if Kyle doesn't tarry, we will finish the book this evening. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for loving us and caring for us, and more than anything, dying for us. We pray that you'd help us this evening, that you give us a profitable time together, that you'd help us to study your word and rightly divide your word and learn lessons from your word. And Lord, get everything we need to get out of it, get everything that you intended for us to get out of it. And Lord, pray that we would learn what you'd have us to learn, that you'd show us truth from your Bible. Thank you for this book. Thank you for this opportunity to teach your book, to learn your book. And pray that you'd help us tonight have a good time around your word. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Chapter number 17 shows the counsel of Ahithophel versus the counsel of Hushai. Okay, so this is Ahithophel and Hushai. And we talked about the fact that Ahithophel's counsel was very, very important. Remember last lesson we talked about how he's a very influential man, a very smart man. This man, Hushai, was left behind at the castle as sort of an inside man. He was a friend of David's, a smart man, and was left behind as a secondary counselor to appear to be a counselor to Absalom, but in reality, in actuality, he was a friend of David, and so he was a spy. He was going to stay behind. He was going to stay in the palace. He was going to gather information, and he was going to report back to David. So in verses 1 through 4, Ahithophel gives his counsel concerning David and concerning the people that David had taken with him. His suggestion is that Absalom should immediately send men to find the king while he's weak and tired and discouraged. So Ahithophel says, your father's out there, he's tired, he's weary, he's discouraged, he's weary in his mind, he's weary in his body, and so let's pursue him immediately while we still have the chance, while he's still down. We won't give him any opportunity to regain strength. We won't give him any opportunity to formulate a plan. Let's kick him while he's down. Let's get out there and immediately find him, kill him, and they'll have no choice. We've got far more people. We've got the advantage in every way. He says that the people will flee from David. If they see an advancing army coming in, will leave David by himself. They'll slay David. And then he suggests that if they kill David, the rest of the people will likely return and serve Absalom. So instead of having to fight the entire army, he said, let's scare them so they flee, kill David, and then they'll just come back to us and say, well, David's dead. We'll serve you instead. Absalom, all the people like the idea, but decide to request the counsel of Hushai, who, in an attempt to buy David some more time, says that Ahithophel's counsel is not good. Look at verse number 7. And Hushai said unto Absalom, the counsel that Ahithophel hath given is not good at this time. For, said Hushai, thou knowest thy father and his men, that they be mighty men, and they be chafed in their minds as a bear robbed of her whelps in the field, and thy father is a man of war, and will not lodge with the people. Behold, he is hid now in some pit or in some other place, and it will come to pass, when some of them be overthrown at the first, that whosoever heareth it will say, there is a slaughter among the people that follow Absalom, and he also that is valiant, whose heart is as the heart of a lion, shall utterly melt. For all Israel know that thy father is a mighty man, and they which be with him are valiant men. So what Hushai says is, if you go out after David, they're in such a condition, they're like a bear robbed of their whelps. You know, there's nothing more dangerous than a bear who's had her cubs taken from him. And he said that's kind of the condition that David's in right now. He's chafed in his mind. He's frantic. He's desperate, and he'll do anything he has to do. And he said, if you go out against David and some of your men fall first, then it'll just be bad for the whole operation. Everybody will be scared. Everybody will say, oh, well, we know David's a man of war and that we shouldn't have fought with him in the first place. They'll flee from you, and you'll be in big, big trouble. So Hushai basically spins this sort of tale, and he's really not on Absalom's side, but he does a really, really good job, the Lord, I'm sure, helping him to make it sound like he was, to the extent that Absalom ends up taking Hushai's counsel instead of Ahithophel. Look at verse number 14. Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel. For the Lord had appointed to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel to the intent that the Lord might bring evil upon Absalom. I think it's it's interesting. Verse number 14 says that the Lord had appointed to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel. I believe that Ahithophel, the Lord is basically saying in this passage that Ahithophel's counsel was the good counsel. That if they would have followed Ahithophel's counsel, it would have been a successful venture, but the Lord wanted to cause Absalom to side with Hushai to the intent that Absalom would be harmed. I think that's interesting how that worked out. The chapter ends with the account of some wealthy men bringing provisions to David and to his men in the wilderness, and with Ahithophel hanging himself in verse number 23. This guy took this pretty hard. I guess when your job is a counselor, then when somebody doesn't take your counsel, it's a big deal. Verse number 23, and when Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his ass, arose, got him home to his house, to his city, put his household in order, and hanged himself, and died and was buried in the sepulchre of his father. Ahithophel didn't take rejection very well at all, and so rather than be wrong, he said, if you're not going to take my counsel, you think you're a counselor. Sometimes the king listens to you, sometimes he doesn't. He says, no, if you're not going to listen to me, I'm going to hang myself. So he maybe had some pride issues going on there. Chapter number 18, end of chapter number 17 is the account of Barzillai, and some of his friends come and bring, verse number 28, beds and basins and earthen vessels, wheat and barley and flour and parched corn and beans and lentils and parched pulse, honey and butter and sheep and cheese of kine for David and for the people that were with him to eat. For they said the people is hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. So this man Barzillai and these other friends see their need and then don't wait for them to ask. They simply go out and provide that need because they see people that are weary and hungry and thirsty. What a blessing and what great friends. Chapter number 18 tells of the battle between David and Absalom. So due to the time that Hushai had bought for David and provided for David, David was able to gather an army and get organized. So he was able to get people to himself. He was able to get to a city with walls. He was able to get in a position where he could structure, organize, and set a battle in array against Absalom, is prepared for Absalom to come out, and makes the battle go much more smoothly for David. In verse number 5, David specifically requests that they deal gently with Absalom. Look at verse number 5. This will become important in a minute. And the king commanded Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man, even with Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave all the captains charge concerning Absalom. So David says, we're going to battle, and we're going to battle against Absalom. We're going to battle against our enemy. But if you find the enemy, particularly Absalom, I want you to deal gently with him. Because it's David's son, and he still has a great amount of love for him, and so he doesn't want him to be harmed. He doesn't want him to be killed anyway. And so the Bible tells us that he commanded the leaders not to harm Absalom, and he did it in the hearing of all the people. So all the people, the entire army, know David's wishes concerning Absalom. Verses 6 through 8 tell of the battle between the two armies. And they say that the people of Israel were slain before David's servants. Of course, by the miraculous help of the Lord, David and his probably lesser amount of men put the other army to the worse. Verses 9 through 17 tell of the curious circumstances under which Absalom was killed. Look at verse number 9. And Absalom met the servants of David, and Absalom rode upon a mule, and the mule went under the thick boughs of a great oak, and his head caught hold of the oak, and he was taken up between the heaven and the earth, and the mule that was under him went away. And a certain man saw it and told Joab and said, behold, I saw Absalom hanged in an oak. So the Lord had provided David with his request. The Lord provided a way for Absalom to be taken alive. Pretty interesting situation. And then verse number 11, and Joab said unto the man and told him, and behold, thou sawest him, and why didst thou not smite him there to the ground? I would have given thee 10 shekels of silver and a girdle. And the man said unto Joab, though I should receive 1,000 shekels of silver in mine hand, yet would I not put forth mine hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king charged thee and Abishai and Ittai, saying, beware that none touch the young man Absalom. Otherwise I should have wrought falsehood against mine own life. For there is no matter hid from the king, and thou thyself would have set thyself against me. So this guy says to Joab, what are you talking about? You know, if I would have killed him and David started getting on to me, you'd have been the first one to turn your back on me and say, yeah, I told you shouldn't have killed him. This guy knows Joab and the kind of guy that it's been said and accurately said, and we're going to see this in a minute, that Joab is a good soldier, but a really bad man. And I think I read that this week and thought that was a perfect description of the character and person of Joab. If you want a summation of what that man is throughout his story in the scripture where he appears, he's a great soldier, he's a good captain, he knows when to be violent and he knows when to spare, and he's really, really good with a sword and really, really good with a spear and knows how to lead people and gather a following and he's disciplined. But when it comes to an actual person, an actual man, the kind of person that he is, he's a really, really bad person. No character. And there's a lot of Christians kind of like that. They know how to lead a church, or they know how to lead people, and they know how to swing a sword, and they know how to preach, and they know how to teach, and they've got personality. But then just as a person and their character, they're not somebody you really want to spend time around and be around. And that's kind of like Joab. What ends up happening here is that Joab slays Absalom directly against the commandment of David because he thinks he knows better than David. Basically, I know what the king told me to do, but my opinion is we should probably do this. And David's vision is just clouded because it's his son, and so let me take matters into my own hands, let me lean to my own understanding, and let me slay Absalom because I think that would be the right thing to do, and if David says anything about it, then I'll just bring up everything that I know about him. Verse number 14, then said Joab, I may not tarry thus with thee. And he took 3 darts in his hand and thrust them through the heart of Absalom while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. And 10 young men that bare Joab's armor compassed about and smote Absalom and slew him. And Joab blew the trumpet, and the people returned from pursuing after Israel, for Joab held back the people. So the Lord had caught Absalom in such a way as to spare his life for David's sake. But sin is an ugly thing, and sin doesn't always allow things to go your way. And sometimes just the circumstances, not even divine circumstances, just the natural results of your sin cause things to fall out in such a way that are not advantageous to you. And you look at the situation and say, David wanted Absalom alive. This guy that found Absalom hanging in a tree wanted him alive. The Lord apparently was okay with him staying alive because he hung him in a tree for David's sake, what it looks like from the passage, and yet he still died. What a sad thing. Well, Uriah didn't want to die either. And all the people that were killed for David's sin didn't want to be killed either. And Bathsheba didn't want to be stolen from her husband, most likely. And so sin's just all around a bad thing, and you do bad things, and bad things will come your way. Verses 19 through 33 tell of how these tidings were brought to King David, and we see that David was extremely concerned with the well-being of Absalom and takes the death of the young man very, very hard. Look at verse number 19. Then said Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, let me now run and bear the king tidings, how that the Lord hath avenged him of his enemies. And Joab said unto him, thou shalt not bear tidings this day, but thou shalt bear tidings another day. But this day thou shalt bear no tidings, because the king's son is dead. Then said Joab to Cushai, go tell the king what thou hast seen. And Cushai bowed himself unto Joab and ran. Then said Ahimaaz the son of Zadok yet unto Joab, but howsoever, let me, I pray thee, also run after Cushai. And Joab said, wherefore wilt thou run, my son, seeing that thou hast no tidings ready? But howsoever, said he, let me run. And he said unto him, run. Then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and overran Cushai. Look down at verse number 29. And the king said, is the young man Absalom safe? And Ahimaaz answered, when Joab sent the king's servant, and me thy servant, I saw a great tumult, but I know not what it was. The king said unto him, turn aside and stand here. Look at verse number 32. The king said unto Cushai, Cushai shows up a little bit later, is the young man Absalom safe? And Cushai answered, the enemies of my lord the king, and all that rise against thee to do thee hurt, be as that young man is. And the king was much moved, and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, thus he said, O my son, Absalom, my son, Absalom, would God I had died for thee, O Absalom, my son, my son. And so that's chapter number 18, and just a couple lessons that you can learn from this. There's an interesting story concerning the men that ran to bring tidings to David that we just read about. Ahimaaz wanted to run originally, and then Joab says, no, I don't want you to run, and then he turns to Cushai and says, now go run and tell the king. And there's really not a lot of clarity in the passage for what reason this is. Why didn't he want to send Ahimaaz, and why did he want to send Cushai? One theory is, look at verse 27, the watchman said, methinketh the running of the foremost is like the running of Ahimaaz the son of Zadok. And the king said, he is a good man, and cometh with good tidings. So it could be, and a lot of people write, and makes sense to me, that Ahimaaz was thought of very highly by David. When he just hears the name Ahimaaz, his reaction is, Ahimaaz, he's a really good man. And so it seems like he was well-favored of David, and he may have been well-favored of Joab as well. And so Joab didn't want somebody who David liked to be bringing, somebody who David maybe thought of as a special sort of person to have to bring these extremely terrible tidings to David. And so he sent Cushai instead. But whatever the reason, I like the eagerness of Ahimaaz in the passage. You see him in verse number 22. Then said Ahimaaz the son of Zadok yet to Joab, but howsoever let me, I pray thee, also run after Cushai. There was no point for Ahimaaz to want to run. There was no reason for Ahimaaz to run this great distance as fast as he can and bring these tidings to David. There was already a man on his way to bring these tidings, right? There was already somebody halfway there, running down the road to bring the news to David about the state of the battle. Joab even says to him, why do you want to run? You've got nothing to tell him. Cushai is going to tell him everything. You don't even have any tidings. And Ahimaaz says, I just want to. And you see an eagerness in this man, a desire to just do something that would be strenuous, something that would be difficult, something that would cause him to sweat, something that would cause him to breathe hard, and he just wanted to do it. He just wanted to exercise himself in that task. Maybe he was a fast guy and he enjoyed running and he was proud of the fact that he was fast. Maybe he just wanted to see if he could beat Cushai. Maybe he just wanted to go talk to the king. Maybe he just wanted to be the ones to bring the tidings first to the king because he thought it was great news and he was really, really eager. And I like the eagerness of this man. So many Christians, let's put it in the positive way and not the negative way. So we really need, it would be nice to see this level of eagerness amongst Christians. It would be nice to see Christians who just want to, why are you handing him a tract? I just tried to hand him a tract and he said no. I just wanted to hand him a tract again. I just want to give him another chance. That level of, I just want to do something, even if it doesn't make any sense, even if it's really hard, even if in a way I'm just spinning my wheels, even if I'm just running, really for no reason. I'm just excited to do something for the Lord. Now, the opposite of that is what we have way too much of, is just kind of laziness and kind of just blah-iness. I don't know if that's a expression it is now, blah-iness. Just people that are just don't want to do anything. And maybe they'll drag themselves to do something out of a religious sort of duty, but even in the doing of that thing, there's no great eagerness, no great zeal, no excitement, and you see Ahimaaz almost in a childlike way, just wanting to run, just to see if he can beat Cushai. No particular reason for it. And so I appreciate that eagerness and think that ought to be an attitude that are in a lot of Christians. It would make us probably more profitable, and it would certainly allow us to have a much better time. We'd have a lot more fun serving the Lord, I think, if we were more like Ahimaaz. Number 2, notice the love of a father for his children. The love of a father for his children. David had no reason to love Absalom. Honestly, you look at what Absalom did to the king. You look at what Absalom did to his own father. David had every reason in the world to despise, hate, have no feelings for, disown Absalom, his son. It would have been very, very fair of him to say, well, if he dies in battle, he's getting what he deserved. And nobody probably would have blamed him for that. But there is a love that a father has for their child that goes, if it's right, if it's natural, it ought to be there. It ought to go beyond even that child's iniquity and sin, even a great sin like Absalom. Absalom would have no problem killing his father. He's out there hunting for David's head, wanting to take David's life. And David knows that, and yet even though Absalom wants to kill his father still loves him. Even though Absalom took his father's throne, his father still loves his son. Even though Absalom took his father's wives in a most reviling, disgusting sort of manner, David still loves his son and is deeply sorrowful at his death. In verse number 33, he says, "Oh, my son, Absalom, my son." It's his enemy, but it's his son. And he's not looking at it at this point when he's dead as his enemy. He's looking at him as his son. It's a sad thing when a son must be an enemy, but even though he was his enemy, David couldn't help but look at that man and see his little boy. Look at that man and see the child that he raised. And we see that there are good Christian fathers who have children who are as far out in the world as you could imagine. There are good Christian parents with children who are living in fornication, and good Christian parents with children who are living in drunkenness, or living in adultery, or getting divorces, or living in homosexuality, or living in just worldliness and carnality, and they hate the sin, and they understand that they can't have a close relationship with somebody living that way, and they understand that there's things between them that, in a sense, put them at enmity with their own child because their child is of the world and they can't be friends with the world. But all the while, there's still that love for that child. No matter what that child does, no matter where that child goes, there is an underlying love, not for the sin, not an acceptance of the sin, but a love for the child. And David makes a statement in verse number 33 that it's an amazing statement, and we see God's love for us in the statement. He says, "O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would God I had died for thee, O Absalom, my son, my son." David said, if there was a way that I could have died instead of you, despite your transgression, despite what you did to me, despite the fact that you yourself have put yourself at enmity with me, I wish there was a way that I could give my life for you so that you could live. And that's exactly what God did for us. He looked at us as his children. We were just as sinful as Absalom. We transgressed him just as terribly worse than Absalom transgressed his father. We set ourselves, the Bible says that we were at enmity with God. I made myself by my nature and by my works. I placed myself as God's enemy. And I had no problem with killing him in the sense, like Absalom wanted to kill his father. I had no problem with ridding my life of God, removing him from my life, removing him from the throne of my life and placing myself as king in his stead. And yet all the while, God loved me even though I was his enemy, and said, I would that there was a way that I could die for you so you could live. And he said, well, there is a way, let me do it. And just a beautiful picture there of what Jesus did for us. David wished he could do it. There wasn't a way, so he didn't. The Lord wished the same thing and made a way and came to this earth and did exactly what David had desired to do for his son. All right, chapter number 19. Chapter number 19. A lot happens in chapter number 19. The chapter opens with David weeping and mourning for the loss of his son Absalom. And this causes the people to sneak back into the city and to be ashamed instead of a more normal victory. Normally, when you win a great victory, especially a victory of this magnitude, of this level, you would come back to the city rejoicing. You'd come back to the city throwing a party. You'd come back with a parade, and the military leaders would be riding at the front, and everybody would be cheering, and everybody would be praising their good works and singing and dancing and praising the Lord and happy. But because of David's weeping and because of David's sorrow over the situation, the people don't come back with that sort of reaction. Look at verse number 2. And the victory that day was turned into mourning unto all the people, for the people heard say that that day how the king was grieved for his son. And the people gat them by stealth that day into the city, as people being ashamed steal away when they flee in battle. So instead of coming back happy, they come back ashamed. They come back sorrowful. They're embarrassed. Their heads are low. They're ducking in real quick and staying in the shadows, going right to their house or going right to their tent, not looking at David, not looking at each other. They feel bad for what happened. And really, they ought to be praised because they were brave. They put up a good fight. These people didn't kill Absalom. They didn't do anything wrong, but they feel sorry for winning. They feel sorry for doing what they've been trained to do and what they've been encouraged to do. And this angers Joab very, very much. Remember, we talked about last time the fact that Joab becomes more and more bold and just kind of does what he wants. Look at verse number 5. Joab came into the house to the king, although in verses 5 through 8, I believe his delivery is all wrong. I believe his approach to the circumstances may be way too harsh. But I think what he's saying is not necessarily wrong. I think David needed this. And Joab came into the house to the king and said, Thou hast shamed this day the faces of all thy servants, which this day have saved thy life, the lives of thy sons and of thy daughters, and the lives of thy wives, and the lives of thy concubines. It would have been likely, had Absalom gained the total victory, he would have killed anybody that would have been a threat to the throne, which would have included the rest of David's children and daughters and sons and wives and concubines, which is why Joab said, we've saved the life of you and all your family. In that thou lovest thine enemies and hatest thy friends. So Joab doesn't get it. Joab, as far as I know, doesn't have any children, and he doesn't understand what David's so broken up about. This isn't your kid. This is an enemy. For thou hast declared this day that thou regardest neither princes nor servants. For this day I perceive that if Absalom had lived and all we had died this day, then it had pleased thee well. Now therefore arise, go forth, and speak comfortably unto thy servants. For I swear by the Lord, if thou go not forth, there will not tarry one with thee this night, and that will be worse unto thee than all the evil that befell thee from thy youth until now. Now, I don't know if this was a needed pep talk in verse number 7, or if it was a threat. I don't know if this was a warning or Joab threatening. Look at verse number 7. For I swear by the Lord, if thou go not forth, there will not tarry one with thee this night. Is Joab saying, I've heard people talking, and if you don't get this together, they're not going to stick around? Or is Joab saying, if you don't do what I'm telling you to do, I promise you, I will make sure this works out worse for you than it ever would have been otherwise. I'll make sure that nobody is your friend ever again. I'll make sure not a single person stays behind you if you don't do exactly what I'm telling you to do. Kind of looks like a threat to me. Either a threat to spill the beans or a threat to take everybody himself and set himself up as king or ruler. Not exactly sure. But in a sense, I believe Joab's right for being angry and needed to help David, but maybe not in this manner. So David ends up taking Joab's advice. He regains his composure. Judah and Israel realize their mistake and express their desire to bring the king back. As the king is returning back to Jerusalem to be reestablished, he is met by 3 significant parties. First, good old Shimei comes out to meet him. So what's happened is he won the battle, and now these fair weather fans that are Israel and Judah say, oh, well, maybe we were wrong. David's always been so good to us and so wonderful. If he was so good to you, then why did you get rid of him in the first place? So now they want David back, and they say, let's bring him back. So David's heading back, and the first person they meet is Shimei, the same guy that cursed David, remember, and threw stones and dust at David and said, oh, thou bloody man, you're getting what you deserve from God. So what Shimei does, realizing that David's now king again, and probably didn't forget the little incident that happened just a few chapters ago, Shimei tries to take back everything that he did and apologizes and says, don't take it to your heart. I didn't mean it. I only said it because you were losing, and now that you're winning, I take it all back. And miraculously, David grants him pardon. Then he meets Mephibosheth as he's coming back, crossing over, And this is verse number 24, chapter 19, verse 24. Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king. And Mephibosheth is in a pathetic sort of state here. He had neither dressed his feet, nor trimmed his beard, nor washed his clothes from the day the king departed until the day he came again in peace. David asks him in verse number 25, "Wherefore wentest thou not thou with me, Mephibosheth?" He remembers what Ziba told him and says, "So what's going on here, Mephibosheth? What's the deal? Did you really say this?" Mephibosheth explains to the king that he had every intention of going with the king, but he was deceived and slandered by Ziba. Look at verse number 26. "And he answered, My lord, O king, my servant deceived me. For thy servant said, I will saddle me an ass, that I may ride thereon and go to the king, because thy servant is lame. And he hath slandered thy servant unto my lord the king. But my lord the king is an angel of God. Do therefore what is good in thine eyes. For all my father's house were but dead men before my lord the king. Yet didst thou set thy servant among them that did eat at thine own table. What right, therefore, have I to cry any more unto the king? And the king said unto him, Why speakest thou any more of thy matters? I have said, Thou and Ziba divide the land. And Mephibosheth said unto the king, Yea, let him take all, for as much as my lord the king is come again in peace unto his own house." So there's never really a conclusion as to what really happened. I tend to think that Mephibosheth was innocent in the situation just because of the state that you find him in verse number 24, although it's possible that he feigned this. But his beard's not trimmed. You can't just grow a beard suddenly, make your beard look untrimmed suddenly. It's pretty apparent if David's been gone for any length of time and he didn't wash his clothes or wash himself. That's something that's hard to fake, something that's hard to make up. So it looks to me that Mephibosheth is innocent. That's what I lean towards. But at the same time, you have sort of a lack of conclusion on the matter. Was Ziba telling the truth, or was Mephibosheth telling the truth? I'm going to go with Mephibosheth. But it is interesting to realize that it's not really, no real conclusion drawn there. Third, David is met by Barzillai, the man who provided him with provision during his flight from Absalom. We just spoke about in the last chapter. David is now in a position where he can show Barzillai a proper gratitude for his sacrifice. He offers to allow Barzillai to cross over with him and to live in the palace under King David's care. But due to his age, Barzillai requests that his servant should go over in his stead. The chapter ends with a skirmish between Judah and Israel concerning who was more involved with bringing David back, which will become important in the next chapter. Basically what happens is, these two tribes that wanted to kill David, well, now they're arguing about which one likes David more. And how come you got to bring David over we wanted to do it. And Judah says, well, he's from our family. And Israel says, yeah, but there's 10 of us and only 2 of you. We should have been involved. And they're fighting and they're arguing and they're bickering and there's strife between them over which one's more involved with David and which one's closer to David. It's almost humorous, especially you'll see in the next chapter. And in this chapter, David also makes Joab's cousin Amasa his new captain in the place of Joab. He gets angry at Joab because of what he did. And so he makes Amasa captain, who was the same man that was placed as captain by Absalom. And that'll become important in the next chapter, because what will happen is, I'll spoil it, Joab's going to kill Amasa. Surprise, surprise, Joab killing people. He decides, you took my place, and so, and takes care of that and reinstated in leadership. So lessons from this chapter. 1, the responsibility of leadership. And this is so important. In verses 1 through 4, David is seen bitterly weeping for his son. The result is the people being ashamed and feeling as though the king didn't appreciate them. Now, what a messed up situation. David just lost his son. If you have children, you know what that's like, and if you don't have children, you could almost imagine what that's like. He's taken it really hard because it's his son. No one else had lost their child that day. No one else's little boy who they held in their arms as a baby and played with when they were 1 and helped them take their first steps when they were 1 and 2 and watched them learn to crawl and watched them learn to walk and watched them learn to talk and sing songs and give piggyback rides and put to bed at night and take outside to play and buy ice cream and all the things you do with your kids as they grow up, and watch them play Little League and watch them, get his first sword and take sword fighting lessons and whatever they did for king's sons, whatever. David watched this little kid grow up from a boy, and now he's dead. And David knows that he's dead because it's David's sin that did this. It's his fault. And David's taking it really hard, as any father would. And Joab shows up and says, you got to pull yourself together, man, because all the people feel like you don't appreciate them. They're looking at you all sad and saying, well, what's wrong with the king? Doesn't he appreciate us? Doesn't he like us? Isn't he happy about what we did for him? And David's basically saying, just give me a minute and let me mourn the death of my son. And the people are saying no. Because if you mourn the death of your son, you're going to look like a traitor to us. And so David, because of his position of leadership, has to set aside mourning for his child, has to set aside all these cares and all these burdens, be they right or wrong, be they justified or not. He's feeling really, really down and really, really bad. And verse number 8 says he's got to get up and he's got to sit in the gate and he's got to address the people and he's got to make them feel good about themselves. He's got to put aside everything that's bothering him, pull himself up by the bootstraps, and deal with his responsibilities as king of Israel, even though everything in his life feels like it's falling apart and it's his own fault. And you're going to have to deal with this in any level of leadership in your life, whether you're a parent leading children, a husband leading a family, if you're a pastor leading a church, a missionary leading a church, any level of leadership in your life, you're going to have to put this into practice in your life. Doubtless, you're going to experience depression in your life. Boy, we live in such a day of depression, don't we? Everybody talking about how they're depressed. All the people that have very little to be depressed about on all sorts of antidepressants and all sorts of just depressed about this and depressed. But sometimes we, because of the nonsense out in the world, we downplay the fact that people do experience depression. And there's going to be things in your life. Sometimes they're going to be legitimate. Sometimes they're going to be not legitimate, but it doesn't really matter in the moment. Somebody could say, you shouldn't be worried about that. But if you're worried about it, you're worried about it. And there's going to be things that are going to get under your skin. There's going to be things that are going to bother you. And there's going to be things that are going to hurt you. And there's going to be mornings where you just don't feel like doing it. There's going to be days where you just don't feel like facing the day. There's going to be Sunday mornings where, look, I'm not even necessarily really, I'm sure I will at some point, to a certain degree I have, but I'm speaking more on the experiences of others. I've heard multiple pastors speak of the difficulty of facing family problems at home and facing church problems amongst the church, facing personal issues in their life, health problems in their life, and having to get into a pulpit on a Sunday morning and put on a smile and say, it's just so great that you're here today. Thanks for being with us. And then preach a sermon with the goal of trying to, I'm not even talking about faking it, but preaching a sermon with the goal of trying to help other people. And having to be concerned about how other people feel when you yourself feel like garbage. Having to get into a pulpit, and you can't get in that pulpit and be depressed and dragging around, because nobody's going to say, well, preacher's having a hard time. He's got those health issues. Preacher, what's going on in his family. He's had a lot on his plate lately, and let's just give him a break. No, everybody's going to say, well, was he not happy? What's wrong with this? Well, he didn't make me feel good when he preached. He seemed angry when he preached. He's mad at us. He got in the pulpit and said something that made me feel... And you're going to have to be able to, in any area of leadership in your life, you're going to have to shove down those problems, push away those issues, and function in your role. And that's important to get a hold of because that's so contradictory to the way this world is going. The world doesn't talk like that. The world says if you ever feel bad for one day, you need some you time. You need to take care of yourself first. And other people just need to understand that that's not really the Bible. You time is really not really a thing. It's all about other people, especially in the ministry. It's not really about you. And you get your feelings hurt just as much or more often or worse than anyone else gets their feelings hurt. And you deal with the same problems and struggles that anyone else does, but you're going to have to just put those things aside, learn how to just get over it, deal with it, and do what you're supposed to do as a pastor, as a missionary, as a parent, as a father, as a mother. Okay, you can't dwell on things. The world says, "Oh, just dwell on it, dwell on it. It's okay. Work through it. Get over it." That's what David had to do. And we're talking about getting over some bad stuff, some hard stuff. Second lesson we learned from this chapter is forgiving others as Christ has forgiven us. David is returning, and Shimei shows up. He's no longer cursing. He's no longer throwing rocks. In fact, he's begging forgiveness. We didn't read the verse. Look at verse 19. And he said unto the king, "Let not my Lord impute iniquity unto me. Neither do thou remember that which thy servant did perversely the day that my lord the king went out of Jerusalem, that the king should take it to his heart. For thy servant doth know that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I am come the first this day of all the house of Joseph to go down to meet my lord the king. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said unto him, Shall not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed? And David said, What have I to do with thee, sons of Zeruiah, that ye should this day be adversaries unto me? Shall there be any man be put to death this day in Israel? For do not I know that I am this day king over Israel? Therefore the king said unto Shimei, Thou shalt not die. And the king sware unto him. I believe when David saw a man begging forgiveness humbly at his feet because he realized he made a mistake that's going to cost him his life. I mean, literally anybody else would have took his head off. Literally anybody else would have killed. Shimei is a dead man under all accounts. Anybody's reckoning say, good luck, Shimei. You're going to die. And I think David looks at that man and perhaps remembers the mercy that the Lord had on him. And he remembers that he has done really a lot worse than Shimei. I mean, honestly, I know all sin is sin, but if you compare the sins, David's sins was a lot worse, and the Lord put away his sin. And so the lesson for us there is that we are to forgive others as Christ has forgiven us. That's what the Bible says in Colossians. How did Christ forgive you? He forgave you completely. He forgave you without you asking. He forgave you unconditionally, never to remember it again. Christ forgave you when you didn't deserve it. He was holy, we're unholy, he forgave us. Why can't we give that to some other people? Well, I'll forgive them if they ask. Well, I'm glad Christ was willing to forgive us before we came, in a sense. I mean, he died for us prior to us asking him to save us. He was willing to forgive, at least wanting to forgive. I think most people aren't forgiving and they don't want to forgive. I think most people like holding grudges, and that wasn't the Lord's attitude with us and not David's attitude with Shimei. Matthew chapter 18 speaks of a man who had a financial debt forgiven him and then refused to forgive someone else of a much smaller debt, and the Bible refers to him as a wicked servant. And I think, if you're familiar with the story, I'm sure, I think a lot of us are wicked servants in that sense. God forgave us of a great debt, and yet I have such a hard time forgiving people over little things. We have such a hard time forgiving people over things that are so much smaller than what we did to Jesus. Well, they said something mean about me. You did a lot worse to Jesus Christ. Well, I just don't like their attitude. God didn't like my attitude. What did they mean when they said that? I know what I meant when I sinned against God for years and years and years and continue to sin against God. And if God could forgive that great debt of me, I should be able to forgive that smaller debt of other people, and we see that in David. Number 3, David's confidence. We got to skip it, but let me just tell you what I mean by it, and I'll let you connect the dots. Verse number 22, David says, For do not I know that I am this day king over Israel? David didn't feel the need to be establishing his leadership. He didn't feel the need to prove that he was the big man. He said, I know who I am. I know my position. I'm confident in it. I don't need to go flexing my muscles. That's an important lesson for anybody even thinking about the ministry to learn. A lot of these people get into an office in church, and it's partially the culture that we've created where I don't like the pastor, let's just vote him out and get a new one. So you can see why some people maybe feel insecure. People get in these offices and feel like, oh, I'm the pastor now. I gotta tell everybody what to do and make sure they know that I'm in charge. And it's totally unbiblical. And that's not what David did. David said, yeah, I could kill him if I wanted to. I don't have anything to prove. I know who I am. I know my position. Now let me function in my position biblically. Number 4, the dangers of slander. The dangers of slander. Slander is defined as an inaccurately negative report of something or someone, usually with the intent of causing a third party to think poorly of the subject. When the spies went into Canaan land and came back, they brought up an evil report of the land. They slandered the land. They spoke bad about it. They portrayed it in a way that was inaccurate. They painted it in an inaccurately negative light so that other people would look on that thing and have the same disgust as they did. That's what Ziba did to Mephibosheth. He came to David, look at verse 27, and he hath slandered thy servant. He came to David and inaccurately portrayed Mephibosheth as something he was not, so that David would also hate Mephibosheth as much as Ziba hated Mephibosheth. Sound remotely familiar, the independent Baptists? It's a dangerous, dangerous thing. The Bible has a lot to say about it. Don't spread slander. Don't be the slanderer. Okay? If you're going to repeat a matter, if you're going to talk about somebody, do it accurately. Okay? If somebody messed up and did something wrong, it's not gossip to describe that thing or talk about that thing or in love, figure out a solution to that thing. But portraying people, well, I bet that I think that they probably just, well, we all know. Portraying someone or portraying a circumstance or portraying a church in an inaccurately negative light because you don't like them and you want other people to not like them too is a wicked, wicked thing. Don't listen to it. Don't spread it. You hear somebody spreading it, somebody doing it, close your ears, walk away, or have the boldness to correct them. Psalm 105 verse 5 says, whoso privily slandereth his neighbor, him will I cut off. Him that hath an high look and a proud heart will I not suffer. So pride and slandering go hand in hand. Proverbs 10:18 says, he that hideth hatred with lying lips, and he that uttereth a slander is a fool. So, and then Proverbs 10 puts together two other groups of people, those that hide hatred with lying lips. They hate your guts, but I appreciate you, brother. Good to see you. See you next time. And in their heart, they hate you. That goes hand in hand with slander. Pride goes hand in hand in slander. And you know that because you do it, and I know that because I do it, and we know that because we go to a Baptist church. Okay, that's let's not even say that. That is just such a human thing to do. It's not Baptist, it's flesh. And when we operate in the flesh, that's what results. Lost people do it to lost people. You got on these job sites, there'll be 8 guys standing around talking, and one of them will walk away to do something, and the 7 that are left start talking bad about him. And he comes back, and another one leaves, and they act like the one that just came back is one of the buddies. Oh, you're one of the inside. And they start talking bad about the guy that just left. And they all do it. That's just human nature. And so our goal as Christians is not to live like humans. Don't live according to the flesh. And that's why we have the Bible and everything that we believe. And number 5, David's exit and return to Jerusalem. There's a really neat parallel between David and Jesus that can be seen by David's exit and return to Jerusalem. Remember back in chapter number 15, look at this, chapter number 15 and verse number 23. 15:23, and all the country wept with a loud voice, and all the people passed over. The king also himself passed over the brook Kidron, and all the people passed over toward the way of the wilderness. So David's leaving Jerusalem, he's weeping, and he's going over the brook Kidron. Look at verse number 30. And David went up by the ascent of Mount Olivet, and wept as he went, and had his head covered, and went barefoot. And all the people that was with him covered every man his head, and they went up weeping as they went. So he went over the brook Kidron. He's weeping as he goes, and he takes the way of Mount Olivet. When David is gone away, a new king takes over. This new king, Absalom, is vain. He's full of flatteries. He wins the hearts of the people, even though his deeds are unimaginably wicked. David does battle with this self-proclaimed king and triumphantly returns to Jerusalem. Okay, all of this is a picture of our Lord Jesus Christ. Hold 2 Samuel, we're coming right back. Look at John 18 and Luke 22. How about a little Bible study here? We got so much ground to cover and so many things to talk about, we tend to stay in the chapters and probably to a fault neglect jumping around a little bit. Let's do that. John 18, look at verse number 1. John 18, 1. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where there was a garden, into the which he entered, and his disciples. So when Jesus is being rejected by his people, the rightful king is being removed from his throne, the rightful king is being driven out and killed by the people, he goes, remember, the garden is where he cries and where he weeps and where he prays. And on his way to that garden, where does he cross the brook Kidron? He's taking the same route that David took when David was exiled, when David was driven out, when David was persecuted, weeping just like David did. Look at Luke 22. Luke 22. Where exactly is this garden? We know it's over the brook Kidron. Look at Luke 22 and verse number 39. Luke 22:39. And he came out and went, and as he was wont, to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples also followed him. And when he was at the place, he said unto them, Pray that ye enter not into temptation. Verse 44, being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and sweat, as it were, great drops of blood falling to the ground. What's the route that David took? He went over the brook Kidron by the way of Mount Olivet. What did Jesus do? Crossed the brook Kidron, went up to the garden which was in the Mount of Olives, and wept like David and the people wept with his disciples. Then what happens? Jesus, we know, is killed. He's buried. He rises from the dead. He ascends into heaven. And one day another king comes, an antichrist, who wins the hearts of the people by flattery, who wins the hearts of the people even though he's unimaginably wicked. He's nice, he's so kind, he's so sweet, he's so humble. The Bible calls him an idle shepherd. And he shows up, sets up his throne in the place of the rightful king, but the king comes back, defeats him in his battle, and sets up his rightful throne in Jerusalem. So really, really neat parallel there between David and Jesus, Absalom, and the Antichrist. Okay, chapter number 20. If you'll bear with me for 5 minutes here, then we'll just speed through these last chapters and try not to tarry. Chapter opens recording the rebellion of Sheba. Sheba took advantage of the discord at the end of chapter 9 and led the Israelites away from David. David orders his new captain to gather the men to him, which he fails to do in a timely fashion. This gives Joab an excuse to kill him and regain his position as captain of the host. The chapter concludes with Joab and his men tracking Sheba to a city called Abel, where the inhabitants of the city behead Sheba in order to save themselves from Joab's attack. The lesson we learn from this chapter is people are fickle. People are extreme. You know what fickle means? It's a word that gets thrown around a lot and people don't even know what it means. And I say that because every time I go to say the word, I pick a different word because I've looked it up about 100 times and I still can't ever remember what it means. It just sounds like it could mean so many things, so you want to put it everywhere. Fickle means changing frequently, especially as regards to one's loyalties, interests, or affections. Okay, these people, look at verse number 20. There happened to be there a man of Belial, whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjamite, he blew a trumpet and said, "We have no part in David, neither have we inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tent, O Israel." So every man of Israel went up from after David and followed Sheba, the son of Bichri, but the men of Judah clave to their king from Jordan, even Jerusalem. So they love David to death. Absalom shows up. Get rid of David. Kill him. Let's go out to battle. Let's find him. Let's kill him. Oh, Absalom's dead. We love David. In fact, we love David so much that just 3 verses before this matter of Sheba, they're arguing with Judah about who loves David more. Why, there's 10 of us. There's 10 of our tribes. We've got more part in David than you do. And you come to just 2 or 3 verses later, Sheba uses this little argument, this little skirmish, and all the people of Israel say, "You know what? Never mind. We don't like David anymore. I know we just called him back and we're just at each other's throats about who loves David more, but nah, we don't like him anymore." And that's just how people are. They're fickle. They're changing in their it's just so fun to say, fickle. They're changing in their loyalties, in their affections. One day they love David, next day they can't stand David. One day they love the pastor, and then the pastor preached on something that they did and not something that everyone else does, and now they hate the pastor. And today, they're just wonderful. I love my church and my church family. They're just great. And then the next day, this church just isn't the same, and I just don't like it anymore, and I think we got to go somewhere else. And I think that's just how people are. People are just changing constantly. And it's really, really sad. Okay, so point 1, buckle up, because that's just how people are. You're that way. I'm that way. Okay, one day I like this kind of music, next day I don't like that kind of. This is my favorite hymn, now this is my favorite hymn. I like this preacher, and I like this preacher. And okay. We're all like that to a certain extent. We should, knowing that that's human nature, okay, let's just forget it. We're not going to get to the end. We'll just tack it on to the 1 Kings lessons. How about that? Knowing that's human nature, we should try to identify that in ourselves and bring it under control. Okay, that's why the Bible's so helpful. It shows you what we have a problem with. And when you know what to look for, you can control it a lot better. So human nature is that we're just so ever shifting in our loyalties. Okay, so that's first half of it. Second half, it is really sad to see people do this to Jesus Christ. People do it to me. I don't blame them. I'm like that about myself. One day I like myself, the next day I really don't. One day I think, I'm doing good. I think I got it together. Things are going well. And the next day I'm just such a loser and I don't like myself at all. And you probably have similar feelings about yourself from time to time. So I understand that. I don't understand why people are that way towards Jesus. I don't understand why people are that way towards their Bible. I don't get why I understand why people would look at a man and like him today and not like him tomorrow and follow him closely the next day and then be wavering the day after that. I don't understand why people would look at somebody who is unchangeably good and always pure and always perfect and be so changing in their affections towards him. Why it's one day Jesus is the best thing ever, and the next day, well, the best thing over except for baseball. The best thing ever except for golf. The best thing ever except for whatever it is I want to do today. And Jesus is just the most wonderful person in my life. And then the next day but I just don't want to do what he says. And it's just difficult. It's difficult if you spend time in church to watch how fickle people are towards their loyalties to Jesus Christ and the things of God. So that's chapter number 20. If we're going to leave ourselves in any sort of position to get through what we need to in the next class, then we better just quit right there. We don't have a lot left. What we'll do, we're going to start 1 Kings next time, and so we'll just throw this material in there, and nothing says we have to start a new book at the start of the lesson. There's no rules. We make the rules. So we'll start 1 Kings halfway through the next lesson. How about that? All right, take a break. Get some coffee.